Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining the Boardroom Club today to our AI Summit, featuring executives from top tech companies revolutionizing the world as we speak. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined here also by a good friend of mine, Amado Vargas. Amado?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, so today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Guy Podjarny, founder and CEO of Tessl, a company that revolutionizing the way developers interact with AI agents by shifting the paradigm from a code-centric to a spec-centric model, setting a new standard for building reliable and scalable AI native software. Tessl raised $125 million from top-tier investors like Index Ventures, Axel, Google Ventures, and Boldstart. And before founding Tessl, Guy also founded and led Snyk, the cybersecurity unicorn. So, Guy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
The pleasure is ours. So, Guy, I want to start with a very interesting question about AI. As you could imagine, AI often hallucinates, which could be frustrating, right? And actually, a recent MIT study just revealed that 95% of all agents don't deliver. Why do you think this is happening, given the robust potential? What has been done wrong, and where does Tessl come into the picture?
It's definitely sort of the question on everybody's mind. It's interesting that the study itself was actually, I wouldn't say flawed, but it was fairly small. Like the N was pretty small. There's a bunch of questions on it, but that's not really what matters. What matters is that it moved the market. It resonated with a lot of people because it is the experience that everybody has, which is agents are amazing and they are powerful, but they are so unreliable, right? The most kind of common example is they tell you it's done, it's not done. So it's like, it's not done. And they say, you're absolutely right. It's like Claude's telltale sign. Come back and continue to try and fix it. But it's very hard to trust what is being said. And generally, that is the challenge. It really is about how much can you trust that what is done by this sort of AI labor is actually executed correctly. And when you can't trust it, just like with humans or with people around, it makes it very hard to depend on it. It makes it very hard to build anything. You're limited to things that you need to review. And so the reality today is that the power at a certain reasonable frequency of success, the power of the agents to do substantial tasks is growing. But because they are untrustworthy, you have to review their work. And the bigger the task you give them, the more frustrating it is to review it, the harder it is to figure out where it went wrong if they don't get it. And so that's the challenge I think that we are tackling, or that the world is tackling. Specifically at Tessl, what we focus on is, for starters, just sort of capturing what it is that you want to do in a spec. And we like to blame the agents for, hey, they're not good enough. But I think if you go to a person and you say, hey, build me a shopping website, and you go away, that's all the information you come back, the odds of you coming back and they having not built the right thing for you are very high. We kind of want them to read our minds. And so that's a problem. You have to capture intent in some specification, some document. We've learned that as humans, the same practice needs to happen with agents. Similarly, in organizations, we're used to the fact that you build some piece of software on it, and the people that built it have left the organization and things. And 3 years later, some new person comes along, they modify the application, they break something that nobody knew was there. But in human world, we have time to preserve that institutional knowledge. Like, this doesn't happen the next day. With agents, they have amnesia. Like, immediately the next day, whatever information you do not give them about your intent, about what this is supposed to do, they would just forget it. They would just not have this information. So what we try to do in Tessl is something we call spec-driven development towards a world of spec-centric software, in which you integrate into agents. We have these two offerings, not to make this too much of a sales pitch, but we have these sort of two offerings. One is a spec registry, whose job it is to basically distribute knowledge to agents. It's like a dependency system. Like, you would install a software library, you install a package of knowledge. This is our policies. This is how to use this open source library. This is how this internal API works. These are just emphasis points about how this team works, and how do you distribute that to multiple agents, multiple projects and such. And then the second is a framework that integrates into the agents and steers them to capture intent in specs as before they build, like write down what they want to build first and then go on to build it. And that are enriched with being able to describe things in a better and better way, to add tests as guardrails. We talk about the difference between an inspirational spec and a canonical spec, if you want to really trust it. And again, all human analogies work, right? You want to provide the right instructions, but you want some means of trust but verify after. And I guess, how do you do all of that, not just successfully, but also with a good UX and make it fun? Sorry, a bit of a long-winded answer, but it is a broad question. I can probably talk about that for another 20 or 30 minutes.
Absolutely. And it's all about context and the intent of the agents in order to really make it through, as they say. But before we dive into Tessl, that I have a bunch of questions to ask you about it, you once say that AI both exciting and confusing at the same time, and essentially frame it through 4 quadrants separated by trust and change. Can you expand on the idea and explain how it connected to the current AI landscape?
Sure. So I'm also an active angel investor. I've got over 100 angel investments, and I had to get some mental model of how do I think about sort of companies coming along into the AI space, not just mine. And I found it useful to think about AI solutions and the whole kind of framework in these sort of 2 dimensions that you mentioned. So one is at an axis of trust. How much do I need to trust that the system will get it right to be able to even get any value out of that? So like an autocomplete is a low trust action because I can look at it and I can verify it. But a robotaxi is a high trust solution because you kind of put your life into it. Automated support agent is a high trust because if you can't, it's not realistic to attend to every action. So it's a trust. It goes from attended to autonomous. The second axis is one of change. So how much do I need to change the way I work to be able to use this? So again, autocomplete, but also robotaxis, they're low change, right? You pull up an app, you call a car, you walk into the car, you get driven. High trust, low change. But when you think about, say, Synthesia or like other solutions that do like text to video, that's massive change. It's a totally different way of creating video, entirely different. And so that's the other axis. And when you think about that 2x2, I would say the bottom left is where most of the products are today. They're low trust, low change. And so all of these assistants that you can review some nugget of knowledge for them, they're the ones that are getting all the rage, massively competitive domains, but point out something on an X-ray image, autocomplete some piece of code, craft an SDR email that will be sent. And so that's, I think, where we see most of the action. But if you're a startup, you have to anchor in the future. You have to think about where is it that the world is going. Your product needs to be more valuable. And so from there, you need to think about how do you evolve down these 2 trusts. If you go kind of up the trust angle, that's more of an IP action. It is about having higher reliability so that you can drive that higher autonomy. So in self-driving cars, clearly in Waymo, you have that. You have a lot of medical companies over there, and it's an IP game. I think the change path is really the disruptor startup game because it is different. If you think about text to video, it seems unlikely that the existing video giants will be the ones that will win the text to video because the powers and what you need are very, very different. And so I think those are much more sort of startup land, disruption land of that change. But you have to get people to change the way they work, which is hard. And then, of course, the top right is what we think of as the AI native destination. It's the sort of the sci-fi block of the flying cars and what it is that you do. But if that's all you do, then nobody's going to use your product and you'll sort of die on the vine because we haven't applied the change or embraced it and we haven't earned the trust. And so what I think of is you have to have a thesis about what is your kind of AI native destination. And then you have to chart your journey. How are you going to get there? Is it through change? Is it through trust? How are you prioritizing that? And to me, it helps me when I look at any kind of activity is, do I know what the AI native destination is? And is there clarity? If you think about it, the sort of Tesla, for instance, went a lot more around a diagonal, right? Of like your low change, you're trying to be in the driver, sort of inline, your low trust just with features, while Waymo took the trust leap to go there. So anyways, I'll stop rambling, but I find that mental model very useful. Tessl aims at that sort of top right. And I will say that our first year of exploration was we didn't find the trailhead for that sort of journey. And it's only about the last 6 months or so that we did.
You actually answered my follow-up question because I wanted to ask you if you need to put Tessl in one of those 4 quadrants, where would it be? And it's fascinating and a great segue for actually my next question, because one of the things that you often mention is that Tessl signify the transition from code-centric model to spec-centric one. How is this fundamentally different from, let's say, tools like Cursor or Lovable that gain a lot of traction recently?
Yeah, so I think we asked, what does software look like in the AI era in many years? And for us, the primary change is that we don't need anymore this translation layer of the code. Code is a translation from human intent to what it is that you want the machine to do. You need to be dictative. And if you think about human relationships, your best employees are not the ones in which you need to tell them literally like take one step here and then take two steps to the right and then put this precisely. Like it's not about the machine workers, it's about being able to express your intent at a higher level language. But machines couldn't interpret that. They couldn't apply that intelligence layer. And so now we have machines that can. We can give instructions that are about what we want to build. We don't need to be specific about how. And so we believe that the future, the destination that we're headed towards is a world of spec-centric software, where what you remember, the document that defines your software over time, is your requirements, is what should the product do. And if you had that, it's this world of wonder. You can click a button and you generate it in Rust or in Go and not in JavaScript or Java. You can say, make it more secure, make it more cost effective. You can just modify it. Importantly, you can have the code or the sort of the implementation be autonomously maintained by the system because you have enough information and enough guardrails in the spec that it would build the right thing every time. And so you can let the people focus on creation, let the humans define what it is that they want to build. And that indeed is that kind of the last bit, which is it opens up the world of creation. I find it actually to be a kind of a fluke of history that, or almost like a joke of history, that the world of software development is a world deemed to be sort of technical and engineer and not creative. I think software creation is creation. You're creating something out of nothing. And I think the opportunity is to tap into the creativity of many more people by building that out. The difference between a cursor and a lovable and us is they might sort of reach this sort of same destination, is that we were very focused on what does it look like? What is this destination? What are these specs? How do you describe a software ecosystem like this? How do you debug software where you didn't write the code? How do you observe a running system? What does a software ecosystem look like in that context? And we're much more committed to finding these slices of the world that are looking to move into this destination and really leading the life cycle in that sort of new paradigm. I'd sort of place cursor and lovable. Lovable is a little bit different more in that bottom left. They are massively valuable assistants and they're just sort of inching the way towards that destination, relying a lot more on just sort of operational excellence. And I'm not vilifying at all. Like I think they're amazing tools, but I think it's just a different lens and starting point. And I think both have a place in the ecosystem.
I agree. And as you mentioned, Tessl does open a new world of creation. And one of the projects that you actually just recently announced and launched is the Tessl Spec Registry, which is amazing. It changes how agents use information and API. But can you share with us a little bit more information about this new platform and how it changed the paradigm to what has been here before?
I think the difference, or like as I ramble on about sort of spec-driven software, the perspective of the spec registry is that the knowledge about what you're building should be part of your code. Think of it as like a tiny little intranet that has the best practices of this is how we develop software over here. Here's the information you need to know. And therefore, this information is not something for the agent, hey, that to sort of go off and discover every time, go off and browse the web and you hope that they find the right information, go off and browse the intranet and hope that they find the right data and then understand it correctly. We believe that it needs to be a core part of the project that says, here are the specs that maybe define what it is that you want to build. You may or may not have those yet, but also here is the information about how to build here. And this information, sometimes it's about information that the agents do not have, an internal library usage or a brand new open source library that wasn't around when this model was trained. Sometimes they're just less popular. Sometimes they're like an older version. You're in an enterprise and you might not know. The agent might be over-rotated towards the sort of the newer libraries. And so there's a lot of useful information. But I think the primary distinction in the spec registry is that, it packages all this information, makes it available, but that it really thinks of this as a package of knowledge that is like a software module. It is now made a part of your project. And so every agent, every developer that works on this project, they all have equal information and they can continue where the other one left off. And we think that is the core principles that we should work on. And that in turn opens up this notion of an ecosystem of knowledge. It allows you, Yossi, and you, Amado, to figure out, like, here's the information, here are the guidance that you want to share. You think you figured something out. Maybe you want to share it with the world. You want to publish a public package of specs that people can use. People have been doing that today in a very kind of rudimentary fashion, right? Basically through Slack, through sort of text files that get shared on the internet in whatever paths. We think there needs to be a means of collaborating and building an ecosystem in a better way. So anyways, that's the spec registry. Super excited about it. We have a lot of demand around building that out, and we're excited to be helping the knowledge sharing in the agent era.
That's fascinating. And another tool that you actually launched at the same time of the spec registry is the Tessl Framework, right? Can you share with us how it changed the way interactions between developers and agents work in practice?
If the registry is more like your intranet and your policies and your sort of onboarding documents for developers, the framework is more like making sure that your code inside your repo, that your internal developer documentation is up to date. So it integrates, I think I alluded to that before, which is it integrates into agents and it sort of steers them. If you say, whatever, create a to-do web app, right? Or to do whatever it is that you're trying to build, today it would rush to code. The agent would go off, it would write the code. And if it goes well, that's awesome. But if it doesn't get it right, now you're stuck. Now you're in this problem of, well, why didn't it get it right? Did it try to build the wrong thing? Or did it fail to implement? It tried to build the right thing. The other thing that happens is you build something and then all developers know you build it and then you modify it because you add a thing, you modify a thing, you fix a bug, you iterate. You very quickly get to spaghetti code that is very unintelligible. If you, as you're building it, are accumulating specs that say what it is that you're trying to build, then at any time, still supervised today, you can say, clean up my code, just remove it. But I don't want to change what I'm trying to build. Like that should still be preserved. So the whole purpose of the framework is to say, drive the agent, ensure that the agent, and ensure is like an important word because you need to make sure this is consistently handled through the changes, ensure that the agent separates storing what it intends to do and how it builds it. And then of course allows you as a human to engage with the spec as you wish. Maybe one interesting thing about it is we build specs, people hear, what do you mean? I write a spec and then I build it. They're afraid of slowing down. Like, what do you mean? Every developer, and especially agentic kind of adopters, they love speed. And so you get frustrated when the agent doesn't get it right, but you're not willing to actually invest any time instead of reviewing it. And so we find these sort of two very different profiles of people that get excited by this. One is the one that does want to really inspect, create the spec. I want to hand edit the spec. I want to really modify things, ensure that my intent is well captured before I proceed. And then you have another group of users that want to do what we started calling vibe specking, which is just tell the agent to do it, like to work with the same type of vibe coding sentiment of just give me a short prompt and let the agent run. And then we just modify the agent to capture those in a spec and then build them. So it's a little bit of overhead, but not a lot. And either way, you end up sort of staying with this long-term memory of what your product should do, right? So you can go off and evolve it. So it's exciting. Just to say, one of the challenges with both of those products is to get the agents to behave. And I think this is all a nascent domain that is growing, but it's interesting to build a framework that works across the agents. And it is also sometimes frustrating because you might have at any given time, one or the other become less obedient. So both products are still in beta and they're growing. But a little bit back to the startup mode, you have to anchor in the future. We have the conviction that the agents want to improve in their instruction following. They want to improve in their ability to integrate tools. And all the labs tell us that. And so we're maximizing what we can do today, working closely with the AI labs to do those. And we're seeing it get better and better.
And you mentioned the speed of the agents, because at the end you want to build something, but you want to build it as fast as possible. But in order to do it, you need also to have some tests or guardrails, right? And you essentially seems to merge in Tessl planning and validation into a single flow. But how do you make sure that those guardrails are strong enough to prevent, let's say, model hallucinations or misaligned outputs from the agents?
I think that's the part around really thinking about the distinction between an inspirational spec and a canonical spec. And so sometimes you're fine with just providing the intent, just tell me what you want to do when you're sort of relying on the agent to do that. That gives you a higher level of adaptability. You're not being as specific. You're exercising the judgment of the individual in this case, an AI individual. And in other cases, you want determinism. And so you want to say, okay, I've created this model now. Don't move. Keep it this way. I want assurances. I think if you go all in on the inspirational, there are too many degrees of freedom and you can't build anything big because it just gets past someone's sort of brain, even an AI brain. And so you have to have some guardrails. If you go all the way to including tests and creating tests for every single behavior and specificity, you have a rigid system. And that is a system that is very hard to evolve. So I think the exercise or the craft of knowing how do you define or find the sort of the Goldilocks location of that between adaptability and deterministic behavior, adaptable and deterministic, is a craft that we're looking to build, right, and to make available. So today the framework kicks off letting you prototype in a more loose mode. We talk about loose then strict. So you start loose. All of these are configurable changes. And again, some people prefer to be very like test-driven development, start with a test. But many people are like, let's start loose, let's prototype, let's get to a system that works. Now let's create tests. And it's a single command, but it's a single command the agent needs to work on a little bit. So go grab a cup of coffee, come back in 10, 15 minutes, and the agent will have created tests for you. Now you have the tests, they're regression tests. So now you don't need to fear that something breaks and you continue. So it's always this sort of balance. Fundamentally, I think good guardrails and good tests and investing a lot in those are the things that let you run fast. So in the short term, they feel like they slow you down. But when you run across a bridge, if there are railings on the side, then you're able to run faster. You're able to have more people pass at the same time. And so eventually these guardrails help you run fast because you don't need to invest time in being careful that you don't slip. But in the moment, these are a little bit of longer term investments that sometimes are harder to get people to do. So our job, the job of any tool builder, is to make it easy. And I guess as a broader bit of guidance, as we probably will slip into entrepreneurship advice in a sec, for anything in life, there's how hard it is and there's how much you care. And you need to care more than it is hard. And sometimes you care very little, but it is so easy that you do it anyway. And sometimes you care an awful lot, but it is so hard that you don't do it anyway. And so a lot of it is around finding, I think as a tool builder, as a solution builder, your job is to find something someone cares about. You can optimize finding things that people care about more and more. And on the other side, you can think about how do you make that easy and can you make it easier and easier? And you win when you have something people care enough about and you are making it easy enough that that equation works in your favor.
And looking into the future, do you think we're entering into a deterministic or non-deterministic future of building software? Or maybe even a combination of the two?
I think it's always going to be a combination. You don't want the Linux kernel to sort of have statistical behavior. There are some things that you want to build. The vast majority of software probably has a lot of room for adaptability, has a lot of repeatability in it. And so you want to build that. Even a Linux kernel project, you want it to use AI, but you would want to really strengthen it with tests. This isn't really new. So when you are working on a mission critical system, like a kernel or like a nuclear reactor or sort of a pacemaker, you don't trust that the developers will not make mistakes. You build tests, you add those systems. And so it is not different, but the AI world will just have it in a few orders of magnitude bigger and a few orders of magnitude faster pace of change. And so many of these things, many of these problems we're seeing are just an accelerated version of what happens in software development today. So when I think about the future, I think software will just grow, and maybe with that process of it, it'll be easier to create it, but it would also create this sort of challenge of how do you maintain these volumes of software and how do you discover that software. I think music is a good analogy of it, as we've gone from it was very kind of, you had to learn an instrument for many, many years to be able to play it, to you can reproduce that with a computer today. It used to be very, very hard to get your music out for anybody to find it on some CD and some limited space store, to today being able to do that with very minimal effort. That created new problems that are ones of discovery, one of monetization. And so there's a version of that is in software. I think what's critical is in music, what we've preserved is music as a craft. Anybody can create music, but not everybody is a Taylor Swift or an Ed Sheeran or a Metallica, right? Like there's still a level of proficiency that gets truly better. What do they need to be better at is a little bit different. So the craft has changed, but there's still an element of mastery and getting better. And so I believe the same thing will happen here. Every developer will become a bit of a development manager. They will be managing AI labor, but eventually they will be a software creator. Their skills will change. They would need to be less of a coder, more of an architect or a product manager, more of a creator. And everybody will be able to create something, right? Everybody will create it to a level. But if you want to build sort of the top tier software, that would be something that requires talent, requires skill, requires getting great at your craft.
Absolutely. And it's actually a great segue for my next and last question. I can tell you that I actually met with one of my best friends, also a software engineer. I told him, hey, I'm going to interview and host Guy Po, and he told me, okay, you got to ask the next question. So with specs changing the paradigm, do you think we enter in a new era of specs engineers roles, the same as DevOps reshaped the software development?
So it's an interesting question. DevOps, it's funny. So my Tessl is my third startup. My first one I sold to Akamai and became CTO there. And that was in the first wave of DevOps. And so I kind of had the first front row seat, or maybe I was actually a little bit on stage as that was happening. And what's funny is like the name DevOps engineer was originally created as a cynical, as an ironic name, because the whole idea of DevOps was to bring dev and ops together. There shouldn't be like a DevOps engineer, but the world, the ecosystem has embraced itself and said, no, DevOps engineer as in a modern dev-oriented ops person. So I think sometimes things they don't happen based on logic or sort of intent. They happen because the world happens, life happens. And so I don't really know if like spec engineer will happen. As we grow, I don't know if engineer will be the right term for building software. I almost hope that it doesn't. I actually think developer comes back to being a better one because as I refer to, I think software creation is a creative exercise, and I don't want to exclude all those people that are amazing creators and can really think about what new products, what new behaviors might be in the world, what better processes we could have. And those people are unlikely to identify as engineers. There might be some proficiencies within it. There's still a need for architecture. There's still a need to think about product, to think about trade-offs. And in general, like certain topics, when you're, again, building a pacemaker, I think that's going to require an engineer. Like, I don't know that you can get away without it. But I'm more excited about thinking about creating a software creator versus a software developer or software engineer than I am about swapping the first word there from sort of software engineer to spec engineer.
It's very interesting time indeed, and specifically if you're one of those guys that actually build the new paradigm. And Guy, I got a bunch of more questions, but Amado here is also a fascinating question to ask you. So Amado, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Guy, thank you. Transitioning towards Tessl's future and industry adoption, I liked how you coined coding as being human intent leading to, ideally, desired result. Looking at that, what are the biggest technical and organizational hurdles you foresee for large engineering organizations trying to make that shift towards specs?
It's a very good question. I think there are some challenges that are very similar, very reminiscent to past technology changes, and some that are a little bit different just because of the pace of change, right? So if you're sort of a student of history, you look back and you say, well, any technology trend and adoption, maybe most recently say the cloud, that's probably the best analogy over here. It's just about overcoming fear. The technology was ahead of adoption basically throughout the period. And so the innovators, the young companies would build out on these new infrastructure. They were more fearless. They had less to lose. They were just sort of faster moving, and they embraced the cloud and mobile before that and others, and therefore build those out. And the larger organizations, they came along kind of kicking and screaming. Like basically when they started fearing they would lose their competitive edge because they saw these sort of innovative incumbents. And many new companies came along from each of these technology trends that are quite disruptive. To a large degree, I think this is a strong trend over here as well. People are afraid of losing their jobs or reskilling, that new technologies are immature, and therefore the companies that have a lot to lose just have a harder time adopting them. Those could be data security concerns, they could be reliability concerns, as we discussed. So there are many different challenges over there. So I think those are the classic technology adoption hurdles very much play a role. I do think that it's interesting how AI has gotten everybody's attention so quickly. And the largest organizations are spending ridiculous amount of money and actually even mandating top-down adoption of technology that is otherwise really quite immature. And the market, the investors reward them for it. So the hedge funds are asking the big enterprises, what is your AI strategy? And neither of them really knows what that means, but they are demanding action. And so I think there's probably going to be a faster rate of adoption here. But eventually, I think the same core principles will apply here, which is the smaller, nimble organizations can adopt that technology before the larger organizations. The technologies that require change, they require an organization that is already established to give up some power that they have, right? When Netflix came about and did DVD by mail, Blockbuster didn't want to believe that it is true because they had all of the real estate, the prime real estate in the store. So they were incentivized to not believe that's true. And we have all these examples, right? Like the digital cameras and all these examples. So I think AI, the sort of the AI native behaviors are the same, right? Are the law firms going to win legal law when their billing hours are like their sort of the whole business model is around billable hours? Are the services companies, the Accentures of the world, going to win here when all of their model is like that? So I still think that eventually the hurdles that just sort of maintain the status quo within these large organizations are probably still going to, in the lens of history, going to be the biggest ones driving the innovators, I guess, to win.
And those small, nimble companies getting on top of it, that really connects with the quadrant that you brought up, that many times high trust does not necessarily mean high change. And going on that, looking at balancing speed and reliability, I remember something that you brought up is that one of the biggest hurdles is dependability, and many times constant review is needed. With AI writing and maintaining code, how do you think about balancing speed, reliability, and traceability? Specifically, how will Tessl ensure that generated code remains audible, secure, and maintainable as the specs evolve?
I love the question because I feel like there's a very different answer to in the very immediate, in the next, whatever, 3, 6, 12 months and moving onwards. So Tessl and maybe like our broader category, we are automating a task that was manual, which was code writing. And convincing developers to do anything in bulk is very hard. It's very hard. At Snyk, our claim to fame was because we could build a tool that developers would embrace to actually check if their code is secure and in how much you care, how hard it is. We really had to make it easy for them to be able to adopt it. And the advantage is that when you automate it, when you run these AIs, you're trying to instill a certain behavior. And when you succeed, you actually do it in bulk. So you can get a much more obedient, if you will, set of developers that will ensure that every time they write code, they document it, that every time they publish to production, they run a security scan. And so I think the opportunity for a disciplined process is much, much, much higher. That slightly gets countered in the short term by just the unreliability of the developers. So like eventually the developers that you have, many of them will listen to reason or to incentives and they will act rationally. And right now we see this sort of sometimes spooky, sometimes kooky behavior of the agents in which they work very, very well, but frequently they do not, way too frequently for software. And so today we have to build those sort of guardrails. I think for Tessl, what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you this sort of a slider that says, where is it that you want to defer to AI judgment? And where is it that you want the lines to be explicit? Do you want, sometimes the answer would be yes, do you want the AI to choose how to secure this piece of software? In which case you don't have to invest in it. And maybe it's a piece of software that's sufficiently new and it's a domain that you don't care as much about. And so you're not going to get reliability, but you will get ease. And as long as the LLM is good enough, you'll get some decent security, but not reliable one. Or are you a bank and you have these regulations and this has to happen? And I think you would actually get much more secure software over there if you're willing to take that sort of rigidity lens to those domains. So I think it will get a lot better. What I'm actually most excited by is the feedback loop. And so to me, once the specs are defined, the intent is defined, the guardrails are defined, what is inside of them, they can be optimized much, much better. You can look at analytics and say, well, just make my conversion better. And You have some rules, you have to stick to the brand guidelines, use profanity. Like you need to stick to certain rules. You have to sort of follow the checkout process rules, but otherwise experiment away and find me the best conversions. And I find that to be an opportunity to get a massively exponentially accelerated pace of improvement of all of the software that we consume.
Absolutely. Obviously, you've experience with building more than one company. I want to ask you, you brought up the feedback loop, and as a product manager, I've learned how important getting up the S curve is, especially with speed. Many entrepreneurs struggle with how long to stay in the ideation mode. What was your process like, and what are some do's and don'ts you'd share?
I think you should get out of the cave as soon as you possibly can. So my process is I start by learning, by consuming information. And so when I have an idea or just a domain of thought, like the first thing you have to do is you just want to understand what is the state of the art. And today there's a ton of information now, even with the LLMs and all that, you can learn pretty quickly. And a picture starts forming in your mind about how you might solve it. And I think at that point, you basically want to talk about it to anyone who would listen and just really hear, does it make sense? The closer those people are to the actual kind of potential user of it, or people that, have some, there's a reason for their opinion to be especially useful, the better. But even if you're just explaining yourself to someone else, then that is still valuable, right? You have to explain it again and again. You get better at emphasizing what are the points, and you get certain just logical challenges. So I think you really have to talk to people. And I think that the key mistake to avoid is people feel like they would share their idea and therefore someone would steal it or they would run away with it. And if your idea is so weak or so unfitting of you executing on it that if someone hears it, they could just run away without you, then you probably should pick a different idea. Like it might not be right for you. So the primary thing I would say is just go share it, gather feedback, go outside, talk, and just get to action. Second bit that I would say is that you have to anchor in the future. I think the mistake that I see very often is that people see a gap and they see a pain point that is effectively a missing feature in some existing systems. When containers came along, their sandboxing was mediocre and they had a bunch of vulnerabilities and a bunch of companies just said like, we'll close that gap. And those are wedges, but you have to understand what is it that you're doing that is a wedge, that is, okay, this is my right to play, and what is it that is your destination. You don't have to have all the answers, but you have to anchor in the future. You have to say, do I believe this need will be greater in 5 years' time? Because it'll take you that long to just start getting some fraction of the market.
Perfect answer. So I actually wanted to, on that, looking at parallels with your former company, Snyk, which succeeded by shifting paradigms with a developer-first mindset and going through PLG. Do you see Tessl following the same pattern, changing the paradigm and leading on PLG?
So yes to leading with PLG, and I don't know how much it's changing the paradigm. Maybe let me define a little bit sort of product-led growth and what that means. And so to me, PLG is very much about the distinction between the user and the buyer. So there's an aspect of product-led growth that is just literally like you have a product out there and people embrace it and they start using it. And I think the question is, when you think about this as a business, you have to ask yourself, what is the distance between this user who's now adopting it and the person who will purchase it? So the best case scenario is when the user is the buyer. You're sending like ChatGPT maybe is an example of that, right? Like the sort of free user is the same person who would convert once they're past a certain threshold. So that is optimal for PLG. It's the same person who falls in love with the product and it will sign the check. Second best is it's their boss. It's in their team. And many developer tools fall under that bucket of it's a team collaboration tool. In the context of Snyk, the developer was the person that was using it, but the person who was buying is the security person. And the distance inside the organization between the developer and the security person is actually quite substantial. And so the companies that existed in the ecosystem were very much not PLG. They were very top-down companies. And it was a very disruptive move to come along and say, no, we care about developers using the product. And we're very tunnel vision. It's like all you care about is developers using the product, the revenue will come. And by the way, the revenue took a while to come, but when it came in droves because we cracked the important thing, which is the user of this. In Tessl, I think like developer movements, they are always bottom up. The dev tools, there are all sorts of dev platforms that came top down and they can get to revenue, but they do not persist. They don't change the ecosystem. The only things that do change the ecosystem are bottom up. I think it's a bit less controversial in dev tools. So that's why I don't know that it is unusual in terms of the business paradigm, but it needs to be executed well, and you have to build a dev movement. And just to say that at Tessl, a good year before we shipped the product, already started building our dev movement in the AI native dev movement, and we now have tens of thousands of followers and listeners to the AI native dev podcast, and we have a third iteration of our conference coming up in New York in November, and there's a big investment in creating not just the technology, but also the movement, because this is a new paradigm. It is different, and as discussed, it's a slightly different identity, slightly different audience.
And extending on that point, looking more broadly when it comes to building companies, I do know in the beginning of this recording, something that you said was to build a product that resonates with the market, and you win when you have something people care about. However, still going through the progression, what differences do you see between building a company in the past, whether in cyber or non-cyber sectors, versus building an AI native company today?
I think that the biggest change is one of pace. When you build in any other era, you could build your strategy with some anticipation of how the underpinnings of the technology will change. And you'd have a bit of time to build a solution that works to today's reality. And then, like a bit of time, as in you'll have a few years now to win in that technology era. And with AI, it feels like you have about 5 minutes to understand. And if you don't move fast and you don't sort of put yourself out there, then the wave just passes you by. We've gone in very short periods of time through all these perspectives about AI already. Agents are, again, now they're so pervasive. When you think about tech innovation, 6 months ago, they were like practically nowhere. That's not a long period of time. Before that, reasoning models changed the game. Before that, more technically, there was all this conversation about RAG, which was all the rage, like retrieval augmented generation, versus now there's more agentic search. And so I'm not going to get into the technical weeds, but a lot of core paradigms change. And of course, the biggest change is the unpredictability of the future. So it creates a world in which you need to be very willing to ship half-baked software and to iterate very quickly to capture the moment. There's just that much more important. It's not a new opportunity and a new thing, but its importance jumps that you have to win moments and then you have to continue chasing it. You have to be very unattached to the things that you've built today. There's this repeating reminders of the article around the bitter lesson in which you invest a lot of time, especially in the world of AI, like you spend a lot of time building deterministic or the evolutionary sort of software around a model, and then a new model comes along and just renders all of that useless. And so you have to make correct bets. It's hard to know if you'll be right or not, but you have to make correct bets around where it's headed and run along. So all of those are kind of condensed versions of previous technology trends, but because humans still move at roughly the same pace, businesses moving a little bit faster, but not as much faster, then I think as a startup, it's a much more hectic, much more execution oriented surrounding. And eventually the companies with the right strategy, long-term strategy, I believe will still be the ones that win. I think we're going to see some massive sort of AI sweethearts dropping and crashing because they only plan for today. But I think only with that strategy and like a patient evolution towards it, I don't know that there's any room in this market to build that way. Which, by the way, I don't know if it's like a fun statement, like I like strategy, and I think it's good to build thoughtfully, but I think execution right now matters more than ever.
100%. Thank you for that. Now, moving on more to Guy, here's some rapid fire questions. Advice for podcasters. You run one of the coolest podcasts out there, AI Native Dev. Any advice for us as fellow podcasters?
I think the biggest thing is you keep at it. I think podcasts are frustratingly slow to grow because they grow through word of mouth and there's a relatively big commitment of chunk of time. And today there's many podcasts. And so the biggest thing is to stick at it and continue to publish. And the second bit I would say is just content reuse. And so you get someone's time, you get their perspectives. And I think it's very easy to get absorbed in getting the person on, figuring the question, do the interview, and then publish the podcast. And you don't think about, okay, how do I repurpose now this content to blogs, to shorts, to aggregations and mixes? And so I think that really kind of multiplies it. It needs to be a part of a broader content strategy.
Right. As you said earlier, you win when you have something people care about.
Exactly.
For
Yeah.
mentorship, who has been a mentor that's impacted you the most?
I've had many. I struggle to give the one answer. I remember Carl Snyder back in Watchfire was our head of product at the time, and I came and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking of going from engineering to product. Like, is product a good path to becoming a CTO?" And he said that the best way to become a CTO is to found a company and call yourself CTO. And I've embraced that. And then I found a company, called myself CEO, and that was path. But I've had many, many, many mentors that I've learned from inside and outside the work. Peter McKay at Snyk told me a lot about scaling businesses and growing those. Mike Wider, my co-founder in my first company, was amazing. But really, I find I learned so much from the people around me. I guess kind of the world is my mentor in that sense.
And lastly, before thinking back to Yossi, what keeps you motivated through tough setbacks and long cycles?
Impact. I mean, I think to me, so I'm in a fortunate place in which Snyk put me in a financially independent place, potentially Blaze as well. And yet I've chosen to do this crazy thing, which is found another company. And that came from the realization that satisfaction comes out of struggle, that you need to choose a thing that you think matters, that if you achieve it, then it has meaning. And that is hard for you, because if it's not hard for you, it might be meaningful to others, but it's not satisfying. And so to me, the sort of seeking impact, seeking something that is different, and that unfortunately always means it's hard. So it doesn't matter how well equipped or capable you are in a certain domain. If you're just sticking to your comfort zone, you slow down and eventually you set back. So, Freud says that there's no growth without pain. And I guess I'm a bit of a student of that.
So, Guy, one last question, actually, my favorite one. What is your favorite movie?
Ooh, I love cerebral but emotional movies. So I don't know if it's one, but I love the Shawshank Redemption. I love Inception. Probably The Usual Suspect. That might be at the top of the list. But that's the genre that I like.
Yeah, Bryan Singer was genius in The Usual Suspect, and
Yeah.
Inception, it's a classic. I mean, I watch it 3 times, and each time I watch it, I just learn something new.
You
And
see the
it's
additional
amazing
hints.
because they still wonder if the end was a dream or not a dream, but I
It's
think
a
it,
part of
it
its
wasn't
beauty.
a
It's a
dream.
part of the, yeah.
And Shawshank Redemption,
Shawshank
100%.
Redemption is incredible. Now I have the pleasure. My kids are 14 and 16 years old, and I actually watch the movie with them. And generally get now the opportunity to rewatch a bunch of these great movies that stand the test of time with them. And it's amazing to watch it with someone, and not just someone, your kids, who are watching it for the first time. Yeah, it's as good as it was. Good Will Hunting was another one that we just watched. As good as ever.
There you go. And Guy, thank you so much again for joining us. It was an amazing and fascinating conversation with you. So thank you. We appreciate you. And for everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other amazing episodes to show you with the chairman of Qualcomm, CEO of Taboola, COO of Box, and also VCs, the Index Ventures that invested in Tessl,
Indeed.
Andreessen Horowitz, and a bunch of other fascinating guests. So thank you so much.